my screen. Does that look right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so Dr. Paul Poulet and I are going to start by giving a short, just introductory presentation on some links between masculinities and the environment. And I'll just make sure that works. Yeah, good. Okay. So yeah, even briefer introduction. My name's Abigail Sykes. I'm a journalist, translator, and educator, and a co-founder of the Starfish Collective. Paul.
Paul Poulet. I have been thinking about masculinities for most of my life, and have found ways to write about it and do my personal work about it and speak about it, and I'm really happy to be here with you. Shall I continue on, Abigail?
Yes, exactly. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble switching slides here. I think there was one here about Starfish that you might want to speak to before you speak to the rest of the slides.
So the Starfish Collective is a collective of activists, educators, and people who are interested in this concept of masculinities in particular, or even more broadly, gender, gender equality, and the environmental crisis and the intersecting place between the two. And what happens at the Starfish Collective is that we spend a lot of time working with each other to create a community of care, and from that go out into the world in situations similar to this and give information about that intersecting terrain between masculinities and particularly the climate crisis, but also more broadly environmental challenges. And I want to just be clear with you, because for some of you, when I say that use the term masculinities, it's very easy for people's minds to go towards men. And actually what we do at the Starfish Collective is focus specifically on the social constructions of masculinities that are present in everyone. People in men's bodies, people in women's bodies, and people in gender diverse bodies. So we're not specifically here to speak about men's lived experience today, but rather the concept of masculinities. And the Starfish Collective is very much about educating and making that distinction also out in the world, because it's one that often gets conflated or collapsed together. Next slide. And one of the ways that the Starfish Collective has come about is through the work that I have done with others in the world to generate this idea of ecological masculinity, or ecologizing masculinities, as social constructions. And when I say social constructions, what I mean is that there are ways that we're told that that we should behave if we're in a certain kind of body that is aligned with a certain way of being in the world. In other words, if we're born into a man's body and we identify as male, we are taught that we should behave in certain kinds of ways out in the world. And the world kind of reinforces that. Our societies, the ways that we get paid, we're really encouraged to behave in certain kinds of ways. And that's true if we're born into women's bodies, and it's also true if we're born into gender diverse bodies. That there's the world responds to us, and we respond to the world based on these really tricky intersections between our biological form and the social messaging that we all swim in. And of course, that social messaging is slightly different in different societies, different social contexts. And I have been, for the last 25 years or so, been working on unpacking that and really trying to find a way to understand how it is that we can create a more caring context for the masculinities that exist in the world. And the reason that I have reached for that is really quite personal, and that's what I wanted to share with you today, because my life I've really dedicated to finding ways to improve the conditions for all of life on the planet, not just for men and not just for women and not just for gender diverse people and not just for human beings, but for all of life. And the way that I came to that really was by really noticing as a young person that it was easier and safer for me to interact with the women in my life. I'm of Maltese, Italian, and Lebanese heritage, and so it's quite a Mediterranean context. And I found that it was much easier for me to interact on a relational level, on a really emotional level, with the women in my life, in my family, my sisters, my mom, my aunts, my grandmothers on both sides, my great aunts. It was much easier for me to interact with those individuals in my broader family than it was with the men, who tended to be exhausted, short and sharp, expectant, demanding, and also in my particular case, because I was born and raised as first generation in Australia, with a lot of pressure on them to have things come good for the family in the new country. And that translated out in there not really being a lot of room for relational exchanges. And that was quite impactful for me. It really shaped me, and I really noticed and paid attention to that. And how do we get to do the things that we all do in our lives? I just kept asking these questions and leaning towards it and turning towards it, and created a career out of this work of figuring out how to create more caring spaces for the masculinities that were being demonstrated to me, that were kind of oppositional, were tighter, but then also learning from the femininities that were being modeled to me by the women in my life, and finding ways to actually embody that in myself as well. And what's interesting about that exploration as a young person is that I found that, you know, I could slip around the gender spectrum from what would ordinarily be thought of as traditional masculine traits, confidence, being loud, taking up space, being competitive, achieving things, inserting myself into certain contexts, winning a football game, or even inserting myself into a job by promoting myself and you know, singing my own praises, all the way through to what happens when I am able to actually learn to cook food that is reflective of and reminds me of my grandmother's incredible cooking, and then I'm able to share with people, and what warmth and connection and relational awakening comes from that. And so there was quite a lot of movement for me as a young person across those gender spectrums, and it really shaped me in the sense that I started asking questions about, well, how can we create space for all of us to be much more expressive about our care for each other? Because what was really present for me as a young person was that the men in my life, my father, my uncles, my grandfathers on both sides, were clearly very caring individuals, but showed that care in quite tight ways that were hard to access, whereas the women were much more freer and more expressionful. And you know, it left me with this sense of like, oh, there's something here for men to learn from women, and there's something here for women to learn from men, and there's something for people who don't want to be identified or pigeonholed as male or female to also explore and express as well. And that sort of gender diverse awareness really came as I became more educated as a gender scholar and activist. And so what I found was that I started asking questions about my family situation initially, and as that got easier, that freed me up to start asking bigger questions about the societal context and the cultural context that we live in. And the geopolitics of the world right now, I think, is really indicative of what it is that we're dealing with. In Europe, you've just had you know, the big news. For many in this room, I imagine the shocking news of the Dutch election. For some people, it might be welcome news. But what we're seeing is that there's a rise in political trends towards strongman politics, or very much ethnocentric or closed approaches to taking care of oneself and one's immediate realm of influence, rather than being more broadly aware and more welcoming. And there's a lot of different layers of complexity in there, but you know, essentially what I see is that we're being encouraged to actually be quite self-interested, and that's actually a structural problem that is gendered. And it's gendered in the sense that the traditional masculinities in the world that we are immersed in and exposed to, that are rewarded the most, are the ones that actually are consistent with being caring in a much more what I refer to as myopic or nearsighted way. And I would suggest that even though there are these trends towards far right politics in Europe, in some countries right now, that doesn't necessarily mean that there is a lack of care. It just means that the care is actually being focused in a much more localized context at the expense of many other people. And so the work that I have been doing is trying to figure out how to reach people and awaken that care and actually widen it out so that we can actually come from a much more empathetic place, not only towards ourselves and the immediate things that we have control over, but also to the world writ large. And I'm saying that not just in the context of the human lived experience, but also for the benefit of all life on the planet. So that there's this notion in the work of intrinsic value of all of life, that all life is essentially on an equal playing field. And that's really something that is fundamentally a caring ethic. That if we see all of life on an equal playing field, that what we're doing then is actually valuing all life intrinsically. And that's something that I have been reaching for from the foundations of this work that I started out looking at from a young age. Now, I want to, before I wrap up, just and pass over to Abigail, just bring it directly to this work directly to the context of the European New Deal, and what we're aware of with this trend and this policy and this attempt to bring about a carbon neutral Europe, is that there's a lot of techno fixes and a lot of structural and administrative attempts to control or shape the direction of development. But what's missing when I go through and read the information about the European deal, what we're seeing is enormous amounts of emphasis on practical solutions, but not necessarily talking about these the substantive solutions or the emotional solutions within us as people, our ethics, our belief systems, the ways that we build relationships. We're still talking in much of the rhetoric in the European deal website is still very much oriented towards economic growth and development, which is fundamentally a competitive principle. And if we're still talking about competition, then we find ourselves in a context of very much us versus them, which also has implications for international conflict as well. Hamas versus Israel is a very pressing example, as is Ukraine versus Russia. And so when we're in this context of us versus them and competing for whatever it is, resources or territory, we're very much acting out a traditional gendered way of seeing the world. And that is fundamentally problematic. And there are three structural reasons that we're in this particular soup, so to speak, not just in the global north, but also all over the planet. And it's at this point that I will pass over to Abigail to share those with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Yeah, so I'm going to move more into the kind of research end of what we do. And there will be some repetition here, but I think that hopefully that's educational rather than, anything else. In 2018, Dr. Paul Poulet and Dr. Martin Hultmann published this book that you see in front of you, Ecological Masculinities, in which they identified three types of masculinities in relation to environmental issues, and partly based on research on masculinities and the vital role of men and boys in this work, but also ecofeminism, feminist care theory, deep ecology, and other strands of previous research. And again, I want to reiterate that we see these three types of masculinities as being present in people of all genders and affecting people of all genders more or less. Just to be really clear that this is not just about men. And just for the obvious reason that we live in a patriarchal society where men are valued more highly than people of other genders. And so the traits which are traditionally associated with men are also valued more highly. So no matter what our gender, we are encouraged to develop these stereotypically male traits, things like domination, achievement, not showing emotions. Yeah, just to reiterate that. And again, as Paul was making clear, you know, we take a non-binary approach to gender in Starfish with the goal of moving beyond gender as a category altogether, just so that that's said. And also, obviously, this is going to be a very brief overview. This is quite a general simplification kind of, but just to give you some framing and a sort of introduction to the concepts. Some of this could also be uncomfortable to listen to, just want to flag that. And that is kind of the point, but just, yeah, be prepared. So I'll start with the industrial breadwinner masculinities. And so these are the most kind of traditional conservative masculinities. They can often have strong ties to industry, to fossil fuels. And there's a sense here that so natural resources are unlimited and their purpose is for humans to use them. That's what they're for. And so, as Paul was saying, there is care here, but it's limited in several ways. So it's focused on the people who are closest to me, who are closest to others like me. So less empathy for people in different circumstances in different parts of the world, of different genders, whatever. And there's often this sort of focus on care for the very traditional or conservative family. So ideas like, you know, fathers are responsible for providing for their children and keeping them safe. So those types of very traditional views of care and what roles men are expected to play in care. And so this pyramid, which is a bit schematic, but it just shows really clearly that there's a hierarchy here. So there's the white, heterosexual, middle class, able-bodied, cisgendered men at the top. And so cisgendered, as you know, is the opposite of transgendered. So cisgendered people have the same perceived gender, biological gender, legal gender, self-identified gender. So those people are men at the top, and then further down are other men and other women and people of other genders in a sort of in a hierarchy. And then you have mammals, and then sort of plants and animals that have some interest, and at the bottom you have things like microbes and fungi. So there's a very clear kind of hierarchy of what's the most important and who's the most important. And this group is the most likely to be skeptical of climate science, just because accepting climate science would question my whole lifestyle and my whole identity. And so some examples of these sort of groups are people like former US President Donald Trump, former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, but also just big groups of people who think that business as usual should continue pretty much as it is. And these are unsustainable ecologically, and they're also unsustainable socially. And so the next type of masculinities I want to talk about are the eco-modern ones, which are more progressive. And these are probably the most common types of masculinities in Europe today and many other parts of the world. So there's an understanding here that we have climate and other environmental crises, we have social injustice, and we need to do something about these things. And the solutions that we see in these types of masculinities are to stay within current societal structures, so more economic growth, more scientific progress, more technical innovation. There's also a big focus on consumerism and individualism and individual solutions. So a good example of how this way of thinking works is that you swap things out. So once we decide that petrol cars are a problem, we swap them for electric cars. We swap coal power for solar power. We swap pork sausages for soy-based sausages. So there's a lot of kind of, yeah, just sort of swapping things out. And similarly, ways of addressing gender inequalities and other inequalities are also a lot about swapping. So it's bringing more women or more of other marginalized groups into positions of power within traditional structures. So more women and more marginalized groups in politics or in boardrooms. So what happens is that you're actually keeping the same societal structures as much as possible. And this is why we actually keep the same pyramid. We've painted it green instead of black, but it's actually basically, we want to keep as much as possible of what we already have, rather than actually changing the system itself. So examples include sort of tech people like, Tesla CEO Elon Musk, a lot of politicians, former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, French President Emmanuel Macron, a lot of other politicians, particularly in the global minority or global north, but also probably a lot of people here, And what I would say is that eco-modernism is making a real effort to address climate issues, environmental issues, and social issues. And it is taking steps in the right direction, but it's actually not enough. So unfortunately, eco-modern masculinities are also unsustainable, both ecologically and socially. We actually need to try and shift into the next slide, which is the ecological masculinities, or we often just talk about ecologization, of moving beyond a sort of masculinities, femininities binary. So what we really need here is actual equality between people of all genders and other groups. So there's much more of a focus here on diversity being a strength, a focus on things like collaboration and peace and solidarity rather than individualism and struggle. A really clear sense of being part of nature as humans rather than being above it. So our relationships with each other and also with the rest of nature are all about care and respect and reciprocity rather than exploitation. We need a focus on small scale, circular and local solutions, and just more sort of a sense of responsibility, but also gratitude, humility, and just respecting limits. We also, basically we just need different norms, right? So different societies, we need a bigger shift into societies that are sustainable, and even going beyond sustainability to regenerative societies. So societies that really thrive and kind of heal themselves, don't just kind of sustain and perpetuate. And one key aspect of this is really thinking of humans, and particularly men and boys, but humans in general, as a positive force and an opportunity, rather than this kind of doomsday view that, oh, humans are bad and we can't do anything right, but really looking at how do we support this shift? How can we help with all of this? And so some inspirations come from obviously indigenous cultures, back to the land movements, permaculture, transition, intentional communities. So there's a lot of places that one can look for inspiration here, but it's also, it was particularly important for Paul and Martin, but also for all of us in Starfish, that obviously a small group of people, particularly privileged people in the global north, can't kind of prescribe what these sorts of solutions will look like. So the whole point is that these need to be explored and co-created by all of us together in our local communities, working out, well, what works for us? What do we want to do? How do we want to do this? So we can't really prescribe solutions, but we just have to make the space for them to arise. Yeah. So that was a quick overview of the 3 types of masculinities. So thank you so much for giving us this time. Do please get in touch, and I will hand over to the panel.
Thank you so much. I've taken feverishly some notes that will bring us into the dialogue. I'm just gonna pull up my screen. So coming back to this slide here, I'm now gonna invite in Dr. Uche Peter Umesurike, Noshin Rana, and Suhanur Rahman. We're gonna join, and Paul, you're also gonna stay on the panel, right? So please feel free to turn on your cameras if you're here. So Uche is an assistant professor in the Department of English, University of Calgary, Canada, researching post-colonial and eco-critical literatures, gender masculinities, and creative writing. And then Sohaner is a youth climate advocate and chief executive of Bangladesh Model Youth Parliament, and is an expert on youth leadership, activism, masculinities, and climate justice. And then we have Noshin, who's associated with the University of Wa, Pakistan, and PhD scholar in NUMML and currently in Utrecht University, Netherlands, for her research work, who is researching in the field of post-colonial eco-masculinity. So yeah, I'm really, really excited to have you all on this call today. I wonder if, Sebastian, you can help me pin everyone so I can see everyone equally. Anyway, as we go ahead, what we're going to start with, and we were thinking quite hard, how do we create something which is speaking to what we've just learned from Paul and Abigail in terms of embodying care and coming to this new world order that that Abigail was describing to us just here, the last bit. And what kind of visions do we have? But before we go into the visions, we wanted to see and hear from everyone of our panel. So tell us about your experience with masculinities in your life, within you, but also in others, and in the world around you. And if you can, do you remember the first time you kind of became aware of masculinities and what it meant? And I'm gonna start with Uche, if that's possible.
Thank you very much, Abigail. I'm so excited to be part of this wonderful conversation, and it's my hope, excuse me, it's my hope that we'll come away with lots of thoughtful and provocative ideas and insights into generating actions on even social change within us and in our community. So I became more invested in questions of gender and masculinities in particular, because I grew up in post-war Nigeria, and my father was an ex-soldier who fought against the federal side. So he was a minority, and of course the minority they lost. So my excuse me. So my father lived with this memory of loss and defeat, and almost everyone from the Igbo-speaking part of Nigeria, which is in the southeast of Nigeria, they also lived with this loss and, of course, trauma. And growing up under this shadow, I always felt that my father still had this kind of martial masculinity. He was loving, he was scared, he was caring. He's passed on, and but throughout the time he was alive, he was always like reminiscing on his soldier days, and sometimes he has his friends over, and then they talk about that. But underlining that stories of bravado, of courage, of patriotism, of idealism, I could, with insights, know that he was really struggling, and every one of them, all his friends, all his compatriots, they were also struggling with what it meant to be a man. And so my father had other siblings, other brothers, but they were not like him. So they performed different forms of masculinities. They were not like heavily built as he was. They just moved through different shades of masculinities. And so that got me thinking about what does it mean to be a man in my own life. And so I took up this research in my master's degree and in my PhD degree, because I wanted to really unpack this question. And I think it's necessary for me because I've been more attuned to how can I be a better person, not just only being a better man or male, or someone who identifies as a man, but how can I be a better human? And that question drives my own creative practices, whether I'm writing poetry or short fiction, or I'm writing critical essays, and also in my own interpersonal relationship. And so for me, it's not only the question of what does it mean to be a man, but what does it mean to be a better human? And that defines and shapes my relationship with people, and not just only humans, but also my environment. And my poetry is heavily ecological because I'm also from an oil producing area in Nigeria, and I live in an oil producing state in Canada. And so this question of extractive logics and regimes has also fascinated me. So I think all these connections between masculinity, oil capitalism, relationality, community, how to be a good or a better steward in terms of healthcare. How can I become better in my relationship to the humans and the non-human order? So these have been my own engagements with questions of masculinities and gender. So thank you, Abigail.
Thank you. So it seems like you've been on quite a journey, and it seems like you're finding different ways of creative actions to kind of bring in the care. I'd like to pass it on to Nosheen. So yeah, going back to the question. So tell us about experiences with masculinities in your life, and how do you see it around you, and when do you remember kind of first being aware of it?
Okay, thank you so much. I hope I'm audible. My voice is like clear to everyone. Yeah, thank you so much. Being a traditional Pakistani female, I've always been surrounded by men, of course, in forms of my father, brother, and then like so many men. And then I got married when I was 19. So then, yeah, another man came in my life. And then I was married like for 15 years, and throughout these years, like he was always supporting me in terms of my education, in terms of my job and everything. But yeah, so this was like me being surrounded by men. And my encounter with masculinity came when he died, like in 2020. So of course I was aware of this thing that I have lost a man, but at the same time I was thinking about other men. And then I started thinking about masculinity, because that was a moment when I realized, okay, so he was a different man. He was different from other. So now I have to decide, do I have to live with the normal men who are like traditional, who think that they can dominate women and like they have like normal, whatever is like traditional convention in Pakistan, or do I have to think about this thing, that how was he different? And then it was like, luckily it was a time when I was searching a topic for my PhD research, and then I started searching that do we have men who are caring? So what kind of term can we use for these men? And then I came across this eco-masculinity term. And then again, I was lucky that I could get in contact with Paul, and then I contacted him through email. And then I was kind of happy, confused, excited and all. But yeah, he guided me, and then I thought, okay, so he is talking about eco-masculinity in first word. So what about eco-masculinity in third word or in post-colonial word? So yeah, so that was my like shift from men to masculinity to eco-masculinity. And now when I'm working on my research, I don't know, but it's kind of eye-opening thing for me, because now I can figure out, I can like think that how Pakistani men, they are very different from eco men. I don't know, but they have to work, like I have to work a lot. So it would be a kind of awareness campaign, I don't know, but yeah.
We will get to that later, how you
Yeah.
can kind of mobilize the masses, but I'm
Yeah.
very thankful that you share with us your journey.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that you've lost someone there that was an inspiration for you. It does seem like you have quite a quest, and hopefully we'll be able to spot like a network maybe that you can do this together with.
Yeah, it is. So
be
this eco-man concept is very like, it's very close to my heart and like to my mind and heart both. So I'm very excited working on it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Okay,
Thank
we have Sohaner. I see you nodding in agreement.
Yes, because Notion is liking the Ecoman concept. We are doing Ecoman project in Bangladesh to engaging men and boys for gender transformative environmental stewardship. So it's not only talking, it's reality in Bangladesh. So I think you asked about the how I feel about the masculinities. So I felt in my childhood, I'm from a Islamic, practicing Islamic society of Bangladesh and very rural area. And in Bangladesh, it's a huge disparity or discrimination between, the capital and rural. And I am from a climate impacted area, coastal village. And I am also face a super cyclone in my childhood. It's named Cyclone Cedar. So I am also super Cyclone Cedar affected. But problem is that we are under the threat, we are under the risk, but we never can understand how the climate change impacting us. Or when we born and we enter a gender norms or gender issues, but we can't understand what is the gender issues, what is the masculinities, and it's a very tough to getting information from a rural village about masculinities or gender transformation, etc., etc. But I did a social examination or social practice that how like I born as a boy and similar or comparison to girl, what kind of privilege, what kind of support they are getting. So, and I did that, and I found that yes, when I am a boy, it's a very privileged and powerful, and I can visit anywhere freely in night or day. But when some girls want to visit market, so they need the small boy as a protector. Or as a boy, I can join my mosque and, in Idul Fitr, Naushin, Idul Fitr, Idul Adha is our big festival. So girls cannot join. So in Friday, it's our, weekly Jummah day. So you can join a Salat. You can get the gift from mosque. It's called Jalebi. But women cannot. And I also wear my mother's shari in my childhood to read the real comparison or benefit. And I came with the decision that yes, as a boy, I am privileged and it's a very beneficial to me. If I born as a girl in the society, that will be very, devastating for me on that context. And my father was very caring in my family. So he was a part of the school management committee. So sometimes some powerful groups criticize him why he is a teacher leader. He had not much vote and many things. So he feel offended, and he took decision that he will join election. But he thought in a local council. But he thought that he is a teacher. So teaching is a first profession. So if he joined the election, that it will be disrupting to his main profession. He took decision to join my mother in election. And my mother was the frontliner to contest election, and my father was a supportive. And in my mother term, in other women leader in union council, their husband are leading, and there is a very nominal. But my mother was a fully practicing leader in grassroots, and my mother was women leader. And when he joined different kind of gender training, he brought that toolkit or manual, and then I start to learning from my mother how gender transformation can be continued. So my father was supportive to cooking and household work. So areas people are criticizing that he's like feminine, he's not a real man, he's a cooking, he's a working as a household. But my father never did hear the others a comment, bad comment. He continued and he did everything. Yeah, and so my commitment is that as a man, as a boys, I receive tremendous support from society and extra support. So my commitment is that support more women and girls from grassroots who are not getting support for these hegemonic and power different structure. So it's my commitment to more support to young women and girls in my activism and movement. Thank you. About you.
Thank you. And you're also touching on the next question, so we come back to that later. But it seems like you've had what Paul and Abigail was also talking about, like having different gender roles being kind of mixed, and then having a more like a non-gender binary approach to it. So it's nice to hear about this of your journey. I'm also intrigued about what you're saying about the rural urban, right? Because this is something that we should try and unpack if we have time later. Then Paul, please. You've already shared a little bit. If you want,
yeah, I won't go into a lot of detail, just because I'd like to create as much space for others. The one thing that I was thinking about, which I didn't mention in the introduction, which is kind of a hook into the ecologization process that I went through, was that the time when my father in particular was the kindest, the most patient, and the most engaging in our relationship with each other was when we were out in the garden growing vegetables together or building things. And there was something about my dad taking time. It was almost like he started to show more of himself when we were in that kind of space. But when we were in the, like, the more functional societal rules kind of space, or like, forming me into a real man, it was much tighter. And so that was really impactful as well, as just like, oh, and that was really what got me thinking about, well, okay, there's this gender dynamics thing going on in my life, and then there's also this this awareness and this softening that comes when I'm out in nature and doing things with natural materials. So that was really interesting, sort of hook or bridge, I guess, between the two parts of the world, and became books and having these conversations, which I just think is fantastic.
It's also nice that all of you shared that it's something related with your families or your relationships. The masculinities isn't this foreign term that it is something that is in books or in an academic setting, like you're all kind of related on a very personal level. It makes it more accessible, I would say. And it makes it easier for people who are new to this topic also to understand it. So thank you for sharing that. Then another question we had, which is also still on embodying care and the concept of embodying care. And that is, in your thinking, so we touched upon it a little bit, but in your thinking, what are the strongest links that you see, the most obvious links between masculinities and environment and our environmental crises? And can you give some specific or lived examples on these intersections between masculinities and environmental crises? And I will pick on Suhaner first, actually, because you already mentioned it here.
Yeah, great. So I shared my personal story, but I joined first time in a child rights movement. I was a child parliamentarian and then law minister for youth parliament. So when I worked for child rights movement, I found child marriage for Bangladesh is a big issue. And our 50% girls cannot celebrate their 18th birthday. So when I joined the child marriage issues, so Bangladesh was a traditional to stopping child marriage event. So parents are organizing child marriage events. So our role is to stopping vandalism that event. But I think critically, only stopping child marriage events is not enough. What the root cause? So we found the disaster in our community is a frequent, and day by day it's getting worse, and it's extreme event. So when the disaster is occurring, so parents are forcing their daughter to marriage, to burden, to cutting their economic burden. So it's a coping mechanism. So it's for girls, and they can continue their education. And another gender norms for boys should earn. So then they're sending their boys rather than education to child labor, and sometimes hazardous child labor or bricklaying. Bricklaying is a very major issue for the air pollution in Bangladesh. So, but they can understand how the climate and hidden connection with climate change, and people are migrating from the grassroots to Dhaka. Dhaka is a most populous with a big number of population in Dhaka. So I joined the climate movement because the grassroots people, they are not they have not enough carbon footprint. They are not consuming much. They cannot afford meat. They cannot afford refrigerator or air condition. So their life is very simple, but they are paying highest price. They are bearing highest, burden or bearing the burn. So I thought in 2016, when I visited a island in Underchor Island in Patuakhali district of Bangladesh, then I found it's unjust, especially to child marriage, especially to mother mortality. And due to salinity, so women are responsible to collect water, but they cannot use water for their drinking purpose or the menstrual hygiene management. So they're suffering the reproductive issues. They're suffering for eclampsia, pre-eclampsia issues. So climate change also sexist, and climate change is a man-made crisis. And I understand through one lecture from Paul Polley and Martin Gutman, organized by Men Engage Alliance, and I joined the Ubuntu symposium or conference of Men Engage Alliance. Then I found that when I started with the climate justice, with the human rights and women rights, but mitigation also issue. Like today we are discussing about Green New Deal or Real Deal. So adaptation has limitation. Loss and damage will be continue if we cannot transition our economy and the energy system. So the root cause is the emission, and emission is not final cause. It's caused by the capitalism. It's caused by the colonialism to extract more resources, and capitalism means more profit and more profit and more profit. No care human, no care biodiversity, no care nature, no care women. So it's a domination. So this domination is a truly masculine. And if we look the Oxfam report is a 1% people are responsible and they are more emitting, but most of the 1% millionaire, they're the women. But when we're talking environment or climate, we are heading to COP28 in Dubai, only 35% women are in negotiation. So women are not only vulnerable, they are also solution maker, but they are not in the table. But men are already engaged, men are dominating, men are leading, and when they are posting their parties, group photo, it will be, you can see it's a men club. But climate change discussion, it cannot be men's club. It should be inclusive. So that's why it's a huge link between, masculinities, men's domination to women and nature. Thank you. Over to you.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I like that you're also talking about the impacts of women and girls and like the early marriages. Like you're for me, the way I'm interpreting you is like it's an ecosystem. There is an ecosystem built up and set up with certain structures, the benefiting and set up by men, but also like it has ripple effects on all of parts of the system.
So I want to add for another 1 minute, like in mangrove forest Sundarban in Bangladesh. So they are facing the huge loss and damage due to climate change. So they are entering more to forest. So the men are attacked by tiger. So it's a conflict between human and tiger. But when tiger eaten the man, so the responsibility goes to women because it's their unfortunate. So they created a tiger widow village and separated the women, but it's not the responsibility goes to women. Thank you. Over to you.
Yeah, I also think there's something, it's nice that you're setting it with a tone with COP28. So the climate negotiations are coming up. And I think very often when we talk about gender equality within climate justice, gender equals women for a lot of people, but that's not true. Like it's about taking analysis, looking at different types of genders, right? Passing it on to Paul, because I saw you doing thumbs up. So you get to speak. What would you say is some clear interlinkages between environmental crises or also maybe climate action and masculinities?
Yeah, so a lot of what I have been looking at as I've gone more structural with the work that I've done as a researcher and educator is looking at the ways that the systems that we are immersed in are very gendered, in the sense that, as Abigail was mentioning, they're very hegemonic, and that plays out not just with men necessarily being at the top of the pile, but also people who behave in those more traditional kind of ways get rewarded and tend to float to the top of those kinds of structures. And you'll find that actually with people who are in women's bodies or gender diverse bodies floating to the top of senior management positions, even in organizational structures like the UN or the EU. So, it's very interesting to notice how There's a way that we get trained to behave. We get shoehorned into behaving a certain kind of way, and we get rewarded for it if we do that. And then it becomes really difficult for us to get by comfortably if we don't. And so what that brings me to is this notion of comfort and self-interest that I have been looking at recently. It's very easy, I think, for people to get really focused on how can I have my life go well and stay comfortable, and do that within a growth ethic, a growth economic model that basically actually is extractivist and therefore life destroying rather than life sustaining, because a growth model, a growth economic model, can only continue to grow with the continuation of extractivism. And if we're,
I'm going to pause you there, because
Yes.
extractivism could be a term that not everyone knows. Would you care to explain that?
Thank you. Yes, so extractivism is basically this whole notion of taking resources from the earth and pulling them out of the earth and processing them and turning them into things that we can use that make our lives more comfortable. So, for example, taking certain types of sand and processing those sand particles to produce the glass and the silicone for solar panels that only certain individuals can afford to have a more comfortable and more affordable, and even actually a better feeling life. I mean, doesn't it feel good that I can say I'm 100% green power? Sure, but that whole process is actually dependent on an extractivist process that is actually earth destroying as well. So we have these huge contradictions and hypocrisies even that we have to find our peace with, make our peace with, and to do that means actually really doing a lot of inner self-reflection, and actually then also at the same time looking outside of ourselves as well and saying, hey, how can I actually prioritize being in relationship across as wide a front as possible? I'm not sure if I stayed with your question. I kind of went in a couple of different directions there, but you can
I'm going to call on Nush actually to kind of explain the link to masculinities, because we have two post-colonial experts here, right? So Nusheen, is that something you would like to follow through with? Like, what impacts us, like this extractivism, extracting the resources? Where are they extracted from? Who is extracting them? Who's inserting these structures and who's benefiting from them? You know?
I was just thinking that when Sohanur was saying that men, like when the people who are at high positions, then they are responsible for climate, like injustice or climate problems, all these things. So I was just thinking that instead of going for the solution, can we just stay with the problem? Can we just think that what's wrong with the system? Because it's not the men only when they occupy high positions. Even if a female is at a position where she can take decisions, her decisions would be like the same. She won't, like, why does it happen that she can't change the system? It means that there is something wrong with the set systems. Those systems, they are encouraging us to go for all these things that are happening in the world specifically, and then in the third world more specifically. So the point is that I think we are just stuck somewhere. We can't change anything. And so I was also thinking that when we say that we have to work for gender equality and we have to work for climate justice and all these things, these changes, or these social and these climate changes, they cannot come like out of nowhere. We have to work on it. And I think though that we need to work on individuals, on human beings first, and we can make people to think not like men, but think like human first, and then men or women, whatever they feel like. But now we are more into like thinking like men and masculinities, and we are like, what I want to say is that there are some decisions that are being made in terms of climate and in terms of politics, and those decisions, they are being made under pressure. For example, if there is war or something happening, maybe there is a man, maybe there is a leader who doesn't want to continue, who doesn't want to be the part of this system, but he has to, because he has to prove, because he has this responsibility to prove himself to be a man. And if he steps back, then society would not accept it and expect it, both. So it's not about the men and women, it's about the systems in which we are being stuck. So I was just thinking that can we do something to change these systems that make men to behave like men? Maybe they don't want to behave like men, and even make women to behave like men when they are on high positions. So yeah.
Okay, structural change.
Yeah, we need
right?
to change.
And
Yeah.
here, okay, Uche, is there something you would like to add to this, or can I move on to the next question? Is there something?
Yeah, I think you can just move on to the next question,
Yeah.
because I share the same sentiments with them.
Yeah, because I think what Nashin's already touching upon is like, what do we need to create that change, right? And this is where we have kind of framed the discussions that, well, now you don't see them, but mobilizing the masses. Okay, how do we mobilize the masses? What is needed for us to mobilize the masses, and who are the masses? This project is a lot about getting citizens outside of our opinion bubbles to engage on these issues that people usually, like, everyone can talk about the climate. You know, you don't need a PhD on masculinities to talk about climate. But usually when we are in these climate negotiation spaces, or we're talking about the European Green Deal, it is it's the same usual suspects who shows up, but how do we break outside of that that bubble? And then our question is, what would you want citizens to understand in terms of sustainable and ecological masculinities? What do you think, Uche, how, like, yeah, what would you like citizens to understand in terms of this term and how it could benefit us?
Thank you very much, Anna. I think that's a very important question. And for me, having this kind of space that is being enabled by the Women Engaged Common Future is really a wonderful idea. So having this kind of space, having this kind of initiative, engaging in this kind of conversation that makes us think beyond the problem, because like everyone, Paul, Noshim, and Sohano have said, it's systemic, it's structural. Whether we like it or not, we accomplish it one way or the other, because we can go on criticizing capitalism, but then we still live within this capitalist metrics or system. But the thing I want to emphasize is, in having this kind of conversation, we really have to also think about personal accountability. And Paul mentioned that. And I just want to also give a shout out to Paul, because he's been very supportive of making me think about ecologizing masculinity. And so individually, what are we doing that demonstrates that we really care for the earth we live in? Then within our family spaces, within our community spaces, within our social networks, what are we doing? Are we moving people to have this kind of conversation? Are we thinking in terms of bringing more allies? Are we helping people to understand the stakes, the consequences of our individual and collective action? And I think for me, having this conversation, sensitizing people more, taking on the role of being an educator, a sort of climate crisis or climate justice educator, not just only leaving it for those whose sole responsibility is to talk about environmental crisis, but individually in our own social, personal spaces. What do we do? How do we think about this action, about our complicity, about our engagement, and then about our potential to enact change, however small? So that's my own contribution.
Thank you. Would you say that we are doing enough in terms of embodying the care that we talked about before? Is that what we need to bring into our social circles, or our circles around us?
Yeah, I can't gauge if we're doing enough, but I think we can do more and we can do better. And I understand that sometimes it can be, we can get caught up in ecological despair or grief, but then we should also really think about having moved through this despair, this sense of despair, this sense of grief for the earth. What can we do more? So there's always a question of, are we doing more, or can we do more, or should we be doing more than we already did? So those would be my responses to your question. But I think I strongly believe we can do more. We can do better individually and socially.
I'm thinking here because the women's liberation that was happening in the 70s around the world, a lot of that started with these kind of, book clubs or small talks in the homes, right? These intimate meetings with your friends and families where everyone's like, well, I'm also experiencing this, Are we doing enough of those kind of meetings, but only for men? Like, is that something, for example, Paul, like, I know that, is that something where this could be heading, allowing for more like safe spaces on the national level? Because we did mention that the cultural is very, very important here, right? So it would be maybe difficult to have something transnational, but is that a solution, and have you experiences of it?
Yeah, can I say something?
Yes.
Yeah, Nosheen, go ahead. Yeah.
No,
Go ahead,
Paul,
Nosheen.
Paul, if you.
No,
if you
Nosheen,
want to,
please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So when you said culture, so I was just thinking that in first world, maybe people like men, they are sitting together and they are talking about these issues. They are talking about like their rights and all this. But I don't think it's happening in Pakistan because of the cultural thing, and then because of this. When I'm working on post-millennial men, then I have started thinking on it that our men, Pakistani men, they are very traumatized because of being colonized, and then because of the cultural thing and because of the religion thing as well, because they think that they have to be strong. They have, like, this is what my husband had been doing all his life. He was pretending to be strong, but somewhere he was being hurt, somewhere he was being not taken care of, but he was trying to take care of everyone. So I don't think in my society, men, they are discussing these things or they are sharing these experiences, because for them, experience like sharing means that they are trying to be weak, or they are pretending, or they are showing that they are weak, and they have to be strong all the time. And they behave like men, they don't behave like human. So that's something that I have now felt. And another thing that we are talking about, when I was trying to implement Paul's model of care on Pakistani men, that they should be caring and they should learn how to be caring and how to care for others. And I was thinking that do we care for them? Do we, women, we take care of men? No, we don't take care of them, and we don't think about them. So, and that is why they're, and then another thing is their self-esteem. It's also very, I don't know, traumatized, it's hurt and all that. So the point is that we in Pakistan are not doing much, not men, not women. So we, like, I feel guilty because I think, okay, so he's a man, he doesn't need anything. He doesn't need love and care. So because he's man and he's already getting everything, but he needs everything. He needs love and he needs my care. So I'm asking him to care for me, care for the world, care for the earth, but I'm not giving him anything. And if he tries to be kind of different, then we judge him, then because we don't expect him to be emotional. So that's why I'm very much concerned about Pakistani men's emotionality now. That why are they not emotional? Because I have been talking to people, I have been asking this question from boys in my classroom, and like boys I teach, that when was the last time you cried? And they said, why should we cry? Because if we cry, people would judge us. Girls don't like boys who cry. And so here is the point, I think. So we are asking them to be caring, but we don't want them to be emotional. And emotion is like one of the humane thing that a person should have, anyone. So yeah, in Pakistan it's not happening, but I would make sure that it starts happening. Maybe.
It sounds like you're already asking the questions to people. And I mean, by asking the questions, maybe people are starting thinking like, wait, when was the last time I cried?
Yeah.
I'm not crying.
And most of the time they say we cry, but behind the door somewhere. But why would we cry in front of someone? Because girls don't like boys who cry. And I tell them, no, we like boys who cry, who have emotions, we like them. But yeah, that's the point. So it's a very cultural thing in Pakistan. They don't share these kind of things with each other. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think maybe some people are thinking like, what does this have to do with climate justice? But I think it has everything to do with climate justice, right? This is the definition of the ecological masculinity that we were talking about before, like creating new narratives for what masculinities are, and not just men, as we've said before, but anyone who kind of feels constrived by these. Yeah.
So, yeah, we need to teach them how to love humans and non-humans, because sooner or later they have to be somewhere where they can take decisions. So this is what I think, that we need to teach them how to love themselves, and then love for the people and the world, everyone. So yeah,
we talked about this yesterday. Love is a radical act for
yeah.
in the allowing, like using love specifically within masculinity norms, like it's a radical
action. So yeah, love and care, they come side by side. I think care is one form of love, but love is like, it covers everything. So and the most important thing is that I think that we in Pakistan, like, we are frightened by men. We respect them, but we don't love them. Like, I don't think everyone would like second me, but the point is that I think we don't love. We just think, okay, so he's my father, he's my husband, he's my brother, so I respect him, I am afraid of him, but I don't love him. And so we need to change this.
I see, Suana, you're agreeing a lot. Sorry, I'm pausing you, Paul. I'll come back to you in a bit, but I know that you were supposed to go next. But I see, Suana, you're agreeing a lot, and maybe also your experience is quite similar, coming from Bangladesh. How do you?
Yeah, the context for Pakistan and Bangladesh or South Asia is same. So one thing is masculinity is not only men's issue or only men's domination. So women also can be, detector, or the masculine. And another issue is the masculinities, or this domination can be harmful also for men. Like in Bangladesh, when we are working on sexual reproductive health and rights. So in our context, girls can get access, but men's and boys cannot, because it's stigma. You are not powerful, or you are not sexually active, or so they have not access. And rape issue in Bangladesh, boys can be raped. Our law mentioned that if you will be face rape, you should be girls or the women. But in Bangladeshi context, in religious institution or any place, boys are getting raped, but we can't protect them in our legal system or on our procedure or policies. So men's also taking active role or caring role, but we are not recognizing them. Or we never, Naushin mentioned that we could not tell my father that I love you. So it's the unspoken in our whole life. It's the unspoken. So we are feeling my father caring, my brother caring, men's caring, but we never express, or they can never express us. And when we are talking about climate justice, so now we are facing triple planetary crisis. First one is a climate crisis. Second one is ecological crisis and biodiversity loss. And third one is plastic. Plastic also fueled by fossil fuel and the company. So we are facing three crises. And it's not only like in Bangladesh. In Bangladesh now we have 100 environmental friendly LEED certified green garments. Bangladesh is renowned for the garments, but it's sometimes greenwash. The companies are getting benefits, and it's good for environment, but only good for environment is not enough. But these garments cannot assure the women rights, labor rights, equal pays or wages. So, and no climate justice without gender justice. So when young people are joining movement or environmental protection issues, they are getting much interested about planting trees, recycle plastic. But in our context, in our movement, they are not much interested to respecting women or gender diverse group. So we are trying to understand them. So only climate justice not means planting trees. also, you know, gender dimension also. So that's why we started a project with Men Sweden and through Men Engage Alliance. So it's a eco-men, engaging men and boys for gender transformative environmental stewardship. You have to plant trees, you have to conserve nature, biodiversity, but you also promote the women to reduce the women vulnerabilities due to climate change and environmental issues. Thank you. What you?
And this ties to what Paul was saying before when he had analyzed the European Green Deal, right?
Yeah.
We were looking at the technological, the tech aspects of it, but are we?
Yeah. So I want to add for extra 30 seconds. So we are thinking, especially masculinity promoting. So we will get a technology that will remove all the carbon dioxide, but no. So nature-based, you know, system or nature-based solution is very important. And when we are talking about the Green New Deal or just transition, so climate action should be gender just climate action and just transition, not only to remove to phasing out from fossil fuel to renewable energy, also promoting, respecting women's rights, human rights, and new more jobs for young people also. So it's not just energy transition. And Europe did mistake when they built, you know, their industrial revolution. So we have also right to development for global south, but we should transition our economy in right way, in just way. That will be real deal. Thank you. What you?
Yeah, I also wanted to say that it was put in the chat now with Patricia. There is also like why the European Green Deal needs ecofeminism. It's also an analysis about the lack of social impact analysis because, and I think this is going to bring us, we have a lot of questions and we have 10 minutes left. I could sit with you all afternoon, but I do want to be mindful of people's times. But I think one of the questions we wanted to ask you, but I think we're going to have to come back and probably have another session on it. And that would be the question on what is holding us back and what actors are holding us back against reshaping masculinities and reframing masculinities. And with that said, I think what we're going to do is go to our last topic, which is altering the fabric of society. And this is also what you were talking about, Soner, and all of you actually have talked about it, but it's about looking at these systems, the legal system, infrastructure systems, the economic systems we have, you know, healthcare systems, they've all been created and made by men, you know, for men originally, like, but then they've changed over time. How can we, by unpacking masculinities, improve these systems? And that's why we're saying, like, by unpacking masculinities, we could improve the systems. And how would that happen? And I think, Paul, you've been on hold for a bit, so I'll pass it over to you.
Most recently, I've been working in the construction industry, and but for one woman, I'm working most days with about 30 men. And one of the things that really struck me just in the last few days, because I'm in Perth, West Australia, and it's been really hot. 35 degrees. And there's this one guy who's an older fella, you know, probably late 50s, who made a point of actually going to fill several buckets full of, like insulated buckets full of ice filtered water, and then go and buy a series of ice creams and then make sure that everybody was really hydrated and everybody got an ice cream while we were all working really hot. And I tell that story only just to say that, you know, you asked this question about, well, what does it look like and how does it show up? It can be actually just these really simple acts of kindness where somebody is actually pulling the blinders back and paying attention to the relationships that they have with the people around them. And I've just experienced this over the last few days because it got really hot where I've been working. So there's something about, you know, Eduardo was asking the question of, well, what does it mean to ecologize masculinities? Well, it's very much about building relationships, nurturing relationships, and really caring for relationships across a wider front as possible first, rather than being right or being comfortable or being on top of the pile or winning the game, which are all of the things that we've been dominated by for millennia, really, you could argue in some ways. Well, maybe not millennia, but certainly hundreds of years, since the Industrial Revolution. So there's this real opportunity for us to actually to celebrate the small wins. Like I've been paying attention to with this group of mostly men that I'm working with, and just noticing where people actually like allow themselves to like just connect and be thoughtful and care for each other. And what an impact that has on our day-to-day lives. So that's something that I was really reflecting on when I've been listening to people share from on the panel, but also reflecting on the questions. And so when we talk about altering the fabric of society, it's really about prioritizing relationships ahead of being right or righteous or winning or being on top of. So that's really my fundamental contribution at the end of this share.
It's also like taking it into like the closer setting. It's not maybe like it's about the relationships around you, but also like culturally, like in a group. It's not just on the individual, is what I'm trying to get to. Yeah. Right. And then I think, Uche, I would like to hear from you, because you and Nashin come from this really interesting like post-colonial. I think it's like the key here. We talked about this term hegemonic, and it's a tough term. It's basically just saying that everyone suffers under these structures of like power structures, and also men suffers from this. Like there's also like there's lots of hierarchies, and I think coming from a post-colonial settings, which like, what do you think in like how could by unpacking systems, what ripple effect could that have on extractivism or colonialism or militarism?
Thank you, Hannah. So I think it's an ongoing process for me, and because when we talk about all these, whether it's capitalism or extractive logic or even colonialism, these structures or formations have been there since maybe 17th century, and so we are contending with a legacy or a violence that is 400 or 500 years old. And so, which is why I always think about the kind of contribution each of us can make, no matter how small, to realign the system or the fabric. And I like Paul's example of just the personal, the intimate. And as an educator, I always emphasize that in all my classes, that we should always think about the intimate, the interpersonal, the human. Even when we study literature, we study fiction, we study poetry, I always ask them, what does it mean to be human? How can we live together with ourselves and with the environment? And then just having these conversations with students repeatedly, making sure that they also are aware, because we need to do a lot of educating, which is what we're also doing in this space. I'm learning from everyone here, and they're also learning from whatever insight I can share. So maintaining, sustaining, and keep furthering such a space where we can have this conversation, translate this conversation to our communities, to our social circles, to workplaces, to even family gathering, like when we meet on Christmas or whatever celebration we are doing. Do we also have this kind of conversation, even on a lighter note? So, and also as a creative writer, I also try to get engaged in this, in cli-fi fiction, in my poetry, in also contributing to chapters in Paul and Holtzman's works. And in 2 weeks, I'll be taking part in a webinar which has to do with how African authors are responding to the climate crisis. So these are the little ways I'm also flagging these conversations and then pushing them out there in my own network and my own communities. So thank you, Hannah.
But it also shows that you're thinking about bringing in citizens into this, right? Like you're using other means and then talking the talk we usually talk in these activist spaces. That can be writing books, I think, is brilliant. Thinking about poetry is brilliant. Bringing in art, I think it's really nice to hear that as a solution. We are very close to the end of our session, but I would like to give everyone who's on the panel like a final say if there's something you would want to add to this in terms of what ripple effect does it have if we change masculinity, if we build this ecological masculinities. Is there someone who would like to add to what Uche and Paul has just said?
Can I go?
Yes.
Yes, my final thought is when you're talking the ecological crisis or pollution or obviously climate crisis, so it requires not baby step. It requires bold, urgent, and transformative approach. And when we are talking about, man-made crisis or main crisis, that climate crisis, so as a man, I am also feeling guilty. And when you are from Europe or you are from a colonizer country, you also have to feel guilty and also expressing solidarity with them and empathetic for them. But last one is only blame game is not enough. Fight between men and women, fight between white and black, fight between global south and north. We are in one planet. That planet should be, inclusive and just planet. And in our lifetime, because we are the last generation, if we not tackle the climate crisis, and we already entered the boiling era, climate warming era is gone. So we need a wider alliance and cross movement building. So only 1% richest people, they are they are creating climate crisis, but we 90% plus people are suffering for this, but we are in different silo. So like who are is a gender rights group, they are working only for GBV and some issues. They never want to know about the climate change is a hidden cost to gender disparity sometimes. And who are working on climate issue, they are focusing on mitigation, Green Deal, just transition, but they never consider gender as a core element for the transformation or transition. So how we can build more, cohesive or coordinative movement and advocacy, including youth movement, gender movement, labor rights movement, and civil society movement, then we can we can support this transformation, because our current economic architecture, climate or ecological architecture, all are broken. We should reshape with just and transformative and caring manner in for our present and future. Over to you, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it also shows like the global majority, global minority. We are in the majority. We should be able to shift this together. The issue is it's very easy for our opposition to kind of say, well, they are not agreeing with each other and then poke us. But if we could kind of overcome that and kind of find our common narratives, I think then we could create that change. Nosheen?
Yeah, I was just thinking that it's just like we are working on something, like if we all are working on eco-men and eco-masculinity and all that, we have just started. So we should be patient, because change would come, but it would take some time. So for the time being, what we can do, as Paul said, that we can work in our closer communities, like we can make sure that like little acts of kindness or little like support that we can give to each other. So it's not that only men are going to do something, we women, we have to do something. We also have to make them feel loved and cared, and we make sure that they are doing something right. Like, so we can start it from individual level, then from a family level, then community level, and then a time would come when eco-men, they would be at high positions, and then they would do something, and then they would bring change. So we can we have to be patient, we have to wait, and then we, at the meantime, we have to work as well, like work very consistently and with hope, with positivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you with all my heart to all the speakers. I'm going to hand it over to Rose, but yeah, I just want to say I really love this dialogue and for you coming here and sharing and opening up the space for us. I hope this is one of many. Definitely not a dialogue that dies today. But yeah, I really, really thank you from all my heart. And I do realize that I always forget to introduce myself. And I just wanted to say, so I'm Hannah, as you know now. I work with Rose at Women Engaged for Common Future. And I'm going to hand it over to Rose, who's going to finish off with our emotional checkup.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Hannah for moderating that panel, and thank you to all of our panelists. That was super inspiring and lovely to hear. I know we're running over time slightly, and so I'm super grateful for everybody that's still here in the room with us, and just in the spirit of continuing the emotional check-in that we started at the beginning of the meeting. I just want to do an emotional check-out before we all leave. So if people have the time to do that, that would be super appreciated. And Hannah, if you could make that happen on the screen as well, I would appreciate that. And for those of you that were sending questions in the chat, I very much appreciate them. There were some super insightful questions. We're going to have a debrief afterwards, and we'll share them with our speakers. And the plan is hopefully to have this not be the last webinar. So have this be more of a series, or have other workshops maybe, and we'll incorporate your feedback and your questions into future work and stay in touch with all of you. So for those of you that ask questions, I really appreciate it. And yeah, they're not just going into the ether. Like, I've written them all down, and we're going to continue to work on this. Yeah.
I am trying to share my screen, but Mentimeter crashed. So just bear with me a second.
Okay. If anyone else has any questions or any comments in the chat, or if they want to, I saw people were putting their websites of work they're doing, which is super nice. Yeah, feel free to do that while we wait. Thank you. Okay, so, okay, I think this is working now. Could you make it full screen?
You see it full screen now, right?
No.
Okay.
Also just wanted to add that I think Paul has kindly put their email in the chat if anyone wants to continue the conversation and get in touch with him. So thank you for that, Paul. That's super appreciated. Okay, so this is our final Mentimeter. Hopefully it should work. Nope.
Okay, I can read them out. Unfortunately, it seems like it's not working. So it says amazing and reflective, inspired. We have happy and engaged, connected, amazing, real safe space where people could participate and share their feelings. Grateful to have passionate people willing to make things change. Very emotional, great global coverage to hear very different perspective. Lots to think about. Hopeful, affirmed, connected. Loved positivity to end with from the Pakistani woman. Sorry, I'm trying to, made me feel inspired. I now really want to learn more about the topic. The insights speakers shared were very interesting. Thanks a lot. Right. Okay. So I think with that said, a massive thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
And hopefully this is just not the end of the conversation. We'll all continue to stay in touch with everyone. And I appreciate so much every single person that's came here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Abigail. Thank you, Noshim and Sohanu. And I wish everyone a wonderful weekend.
Yeah, the same. Lovely day,
Thank you so much,
depending
Victor.
on where in the world you are. Good night.
Paul, I'm
Right.
going to send you an email shortly.
Yeah, do that. It's so great to reconnect with you.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye,
Hannah,
Nashim.
should we stay on or should we drop off?
We can drop off and I'll send you another call link. If you
Okay.
want.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll send something quickly after.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Or actually, no, everyone has left now, so I can kick them out. If I do that, that's
okay.
probably
So
easier.
we'll wait.
Yeah,
Okay. All right.
just kick people out. Like,
Bye-bye. Gone.
wait. Yeah, I can remove people. Feel free